Isle of Man government has this week launched a new Manx language strategy, which includes an ambitious target of having 5,000 Manx speakers by 2032. Perspective this week talks to pupils, teachers, children, parents, language leaders and politicians about the new strategy and the ambitious target which seeks to double the number of speakers in 10 years. So does government investment in our indigenous language represent value for money? I spoke to Munjavega directors Paul Salmon, Ralph Peake and Adrian Kane. What are the key aspects for the development over the next 5 years that Munjavega is focused on?
I think really the Munjavega wants to be focusing on the language, obviously, and how we can then support people learning the language and how they can actually use the language. So it's really important to not only get the students the help, but also the families and their friends as well. So we want to sort of broaden that out in the future and offer support and encourage people to use the language more.
And specifically, what is it that Munjavega does for the uninitiated? I mean, Munjavega means the little people or themselves. What actually is the purpose of the organisation?
Well, the purpose of the organisation is to promote the Manx language, but for the last 20 years, it's really ran the Bunskull school here. The department's now taken over the running of that, but we've still got the nurseries here at St John's, and it's really that promotion and how we can actually start working together. There's a number of charities here on the island, and we'd actually like to think that we can come together and work together as Manx language charities. And
of course, you mentioned the Bunskull Gilgach, which is the Manx language school, and your children actually attended this school.
Absolutely, as the three boys did, which was great. We found that really excellent, really, that they actually had a language, a second language. Everything was taught in that second language, and our eldest son actually took his GCSE Manx exam at University College of Man, as it was then. So he actually had to go at night school to take that. But it was great, really, to have a 12-year-old pass a GCSE.
Paul Salmon, you're also a director of Munjavega and member of the Cruinniach Committee and the founder and sole trader of the Tantaran Ramsey Manx Group.
Tantaran Ramsey Manx Group, yes, gets people together in Ramsey in the north to speak Manx and learn Manx, indeed. Within Cruinniach, and Cruinniach has always been set up to encourage music and dance and the Manx language. And it's been going a long time now, over 40 years. And that was one of the key things. And it interacts with the other Celtic countries, and their language is important to them. It's very important to us too. So we've got a kind of international dimension as well. That's carried on very successfully through the Bunskull, interacting with other countries too.
Your engagement and involvement with Munjavega comes in part, at least, because your son attended the Bunskull Gilgach.
He did indeed. We moved to the island just about the time that he was starting school, and although I'd spoken to him in Manx when he was a small child, he went to the Bunskull. He picked up Manx really quickly. He really loved the school, and it's really developed him as a person. And he even though he's in his 20s now, he still regularly speaks Manx with people. He did his A-level. He was at Ramsey Grammar School. He's done his A-level as well in Manx. So, I've seen it right the way through. And in fact, the other children from the north of the island that came to the school at the same time as he did are also still have that contact with Manx. Yeah.
As well as this, you run the Tantaran Ramsey Manx Group. I mean, why are you so interested in the language?
From a personal perspective, it's been around, and I've been learning the language for 35 years or more. So, and I think it's really important for the island. It's part of the island, part of the culture. And Cheshire Gilgach has the motto, Gunchenia Gunchia, which is without a language, you haven't got a proper country. And I strongly believe that. And other people do. And I don't think people in general realise quite how many people around the island do speak a little bit of Manx or are involved with Manx. Tantaran is a way of encouraging that, and works with the other Manx groups in the north of the island to encourage opportunity for Manx, and that's great.
And presumably new lessons will be starting up in September?
Absolutely. We'll be starting a new set of lessons in September, and I hope to extend the range of lessons that we can do.
Adrian Kane, you're also a parent of a child at the Bunskull, or a former pupil at the Bunskull, as well as now being a teacher at the Bunskull. How does that all work?
Well, very well, I hope. Yeah. Well, yeah. My son is now at QE2. He, we still speak Manx together at home. So I live a lot of my life through Manx because obviously I teach through Manx, and then we continue to talk Manx at home. So it's just something very natural to him and natural to us, really. But yeah, teaching at the Bunskull is well, I was talking to a linguist in Edinburgh not so long ago, and she said, "Oh, it's just you've got to see learning through another language as a gift, really, and that's it. Whatever the pros and cons, whatever you might think of it, it is a gift, and I think the kids here do have a gift, really." It is something which is unique and special, and the kids realise that, I think, and they get introduced to things that children who go through a sort of an English medium education won't. They get the whole gamut of normal stuff. We've got some really good, and we have had, really good sports people through this school. Some of them have got parents on the committee of Mornjaveda, etc. So there's been some brilliant sports people through the school. There's brilliant linguists through the school, brilliant musicians through the school, and writers and stuff, and just ordinary kids as well, who've all got the one thing in common, and that they're fluent in Manx, really. And I think that gives a really great dimension to their lives, really.
And of course, the Bunskull has got quite a world reputation for what it has achieved, because effectively, for the first time in 150 years, Manx is now the language of tuition in a school. So, 150-year gap, and it's doing fantastic stuff. And also managed to persuade UNESCO, of all things, to actually change the language category, because it was describing Manx as extinct, whilst the children were actually speaking Manx.
Yeah, it's a number of years ago now, isn't it, really? The Bunskull is it's an immersion school. We do loads of stuff with other schools, like in Ireland. We've got some good links with schools in Ireland and Wales now. We're talking to some Breton musicians are here today about doing a link with a Breton school. So we have quite a global perspective, I think. And I think part of the reason we do is because we learn things through, Manx Gaelic. So the kids are intellectually aware of language and, about going between English and Manx. And that is only good, I think, for their development of language, whether it be English. Always said, like, if you I know some parents might think, what will happen to quality of their English if they learn things through this medium of Manx. Always sort of said, look, if you're really worried about the quality of the English, if that's a big concern to you, then you should definitely send your kid here, because ironically, learning through another language does just make you sort of, it does things to the brain, I think, which makes you linguistically articulate in Manx and English, really. It benefits. It's just that, it's just that sort of additional factor, really, which these are the only kids in the Isle of Man who learn everything through another language.
And of course, it's not a unique thing in the world, bilingualism or even trilingualism. What is unusual is the situation in our part of the world where so few people speak a second language.
Yeah, monolingualism can be cured, as they say, there's no doubt about it. I think the kids here are more interested in language, full stop, and it definitely helps them go on to take up other languages, not because they're necessarily better at other languages, but I just think they're not intimidated by language. So I would say if you want your child to be, to talk French or take up French at secondary school, your best bet is get them into a Manx immersion school, because they're going to be interested in language. They're not going to be intimidated by doing another language. We do several other languages here at various stages, teaching the kids some Irish, some Welsh, other languages. So they're not intimidated by language. Yeah.
If you had a bottomless pit of money, what would the top two things, I was going to say top three, but we'll go with the top two things that you would hope that the strategy will be able to deliver over the course of the next 5 to 10 years. Perhaps if I start with Ralph on that.
I think what you want is actually more students here, raise awareness, more students here, but in the future, another school. I think a second school would be great.
Paul, top two things.
My thing is that we've developed the Pos and Clyde, the group, the language groups for mums and tots, or parents and tots, and I think they're so important because learning language at an early age is great. It really gets you started, and the strategy for increasing the number of Pos and Clydes around the island is really important, and the second thing is being able to support parents or grandparents or the community to support those children in their understanding of Manx. So I think those are two of the things in the strategy that look really good.
And do you think that government generally understands the potential benefits from having our own native language, our own indigenous language? I know in other countries like obviously Wales, Scotland and Ireland, the governments there certainly do promote and get the whole economic benefit of their indigenous languages.
Yeah, I don't think we do appreciate quite how valuable it is in selling the Isle of Man as a country, as a developed country, and and what it can do. It gives a real character, shows its individuality. I'm going to the Welsh Eisteddfod this year, and that really shows how strong it is. And if you look, for example, at the BBC and their presenters of various things, news presenters or programme presenters, if you dig down, there's an awful lot of those that are Welsh speakers because they've got that bilingualism which carries forward into good presentation and good understanding of what's going on. And I think that's a really important thing, and I think that's what we could have more of here.
Adrian Kane, I've given you a bit of a chance to think of the top two things that you would hope would be delivered in the next 5 to 10 years.
Well, you were saying, do people get it? I always remember years gone by, people asking me, what's the point of Manx? My stock response was, well, what's the point of the Isle of Man, really? The Isle of Man has a lot to offer, could have a lot to offer, and part of that is a cultural identity, really. I think it is crucial to identifying this place as different, unique, and something special. But on the once, Bunskull in Douglas, I'll add a bit more to that. I think would be a big move, or some kind of facility in Douglas. Again, I agree with Paul saying a network of Pos and Clyde sort of feeding into a larger. What I'd really like is a sort of real network, a community-based organisation which brings together young children, their parents, the teachers. Both teachers are young children, teachers are of children a bit older, who can therefore really create a sort of continuity from early years through to children growing up into becoming adults, and a sense that almost is difficult to put a finger on it, but a real sense that everybody's working together to achieve that, and that there's a real community vibe to that involvement in the language and involvement of parents and young children in the language.
And you mentioned specifically Douglas there. I mean, the latest census, the 2021 census showed, I think it was another 20 to 25% increase in the number of people who spoke Manx. But what that also demonstrates is a geographical split, which certainly in where we are today, in St John's and the West seems to have a higher proportion of Manx speakers, whereas the Douglas, sort of Onchan, Braddon area, over the past two censuses, there's been a relatively small proportion of Manx speakers. What's the reason behind that, do you think?
Well, I think the Isle of Man's changing a lot and quickly, and the reality is we need to think what the language can offer to people who move to the Isle of Man, predominantly from England, who move to estates, you know, maybe like estates on the outskirts of Balasal or whatever, if they move here, you know, with no connection to the island, why would the language be of any interest to them, really? Do they just see it as something, well, it's for the old Manxies and stuff like that, that it's nothing to do with them, and that their life is basically living in Douglas, working in Douglas, accessing UK news through the BBC, reading the Daily Mail, and all this sort of stuff. And I do think there is challenges for the Isle of Man if it's, and for us, if we're not to be sort of pigeonholed really as something, strange and archaic and ancient, stuck out in the middle of Peel, really. But one way of articulating that is through bilingualism, really. There's no reason why what we're doing, there's parents here or Manx or anything like that. My wife's not Manx. But what all the parents do have here in common is a belief in bilingualism and the knowledge we mentioned before that to access a language at an early stage is a gift, really. And so it'd be great, why can't we have, children from Polish, Ukrainian, English, Filipino, as well as Manx backgrounds here. That, in some sense, that's part of the ambition for me.
The strategy, the strategy does include spreading Manx and the opportunity for children to learn Manx in all the other schools outside the Bunskull through the peripatetic Manx team, and that is really important because children gain an awareness of that distinction of particularly if their family's coming in, an understanding of what it means to be Manx, what it means to live in the Isle of Man. And that opportunity to learn Manx within those schools is really good. It also gives them the opportunity to work well in with music and dance and those folk activities. It gives them the opportunity to participate in that, and that gives a broader understanding of where the Isle of Man's coming from and where it should be going to, perhaps. The strategy covers a lot of different areas, and Munja Vega, as well as focusing on the Pod and Cloy, the nurseries and the Bunskull, also is looking to promote resources and work on promoting the sort of resources that will support that kind of teaching and understanding, and to go out into the adult community as well, and groups such as Tantran also get the opportunity to promote material for adult learning, giving people the opportunity in the evenings to learn a bit of Manx and understand what's going on.
And a final question then, back to the chair, Ralph Peake. Does Manx have as vibrant a future as it's had for the last 60 years? I mean, 1961, we had the low point for the language in terms of recorded numbers of speakers, just 161 speakers. By 2021 census, 60 years later, we were up to 2,223 speakers, which is phenomenal growth, really. Do you think that level of growth is going to be able to continue in the future?
Yeah, I think the future's strong, actually. I think when I went to school in Laxey Primary School, it's not something you're aware of, Manx language, and growing up in Laxey there, it was, people just didn't refer to it at all. So it's great to see it, and yourself and lots of other people put so much time and effort in over 20 years ago to really put Manx language now aware. People are aware of it now, and what we can do is build on that. We've got a good foundation here. We've got one school. As Adrian said, it'd be great to get one in Douglas as well. But that's really, I think, a strong future, good foundations now, and let's build on that.
Mary, Matilda, Kinley and Frank all attended the Bunskull Gilgach, the Manx language school. They're now at QE2 Secondary School in Peel. So all four of you have been to the Bunskull Gilgach. What were your experiences at the Bunskull?
Oh, it was amazing. We learnt a lot of Manx from the very beginning in reception all the way up to year 6 when we were leaving, and it was just amazing to know all of that this language has just been hidden from everyone else, and we're the ones who know about it.
Well, because it was a very small school, I think everybody knew each other, and it was a very good community, and everybody was were friends with each other.
Mary?
We got to explore other Gaelic languages. For example, we went to Ireland. Well, some of us went to Ireland, and we got to explore their Gaelic language as well.
Frank?
I think, well, our experiences, it kind of felt like we had our own secret language, because obviously pretty much the only people that our age who knew it were people who were going to that school. And I think also the teachers managed to create a way of like making it almost quite enjoyable and without just, kind of, oh, this word means this one means this, kind of like they integrated it into the education system really well.
And do you all still use Manx?
Yes, we speak it all the time, actually. Yeah, and we do history and, well, now we do geography and RE through Manx, so that keeps our Manx up.
Mary?
Yeah, we use Manx quite a lot. Sometimes when we don't want people to hear what we're saying because we're talking about something quite personal.
I agree with Mary, but also it's kind of sad to know that if we're the only people who speak Manx, and it would be nice if everyone could kind of at least know a little bit and know what we're talking about at the same time.
Yeah, what she said, to be honest.
And I suppose we heard earlier at the launch that actually when I was growing up, there was hardly anybody that speaks Manx, and now there's loads of you, isn't there?
Yeah, there are quite a lot of us. I think the really nice thing would be if we could get a lot more children, like a lot more people involved, especially young children, so they can know the language throughout their life and pass it on to if they have children or their friends or whoever.
And you, well, I imagine you do, Frank, because I know your family, but there must be lots of people that you meet outside of school that you can speak Manx to.
Yeah, it is cool being able to bump into someone and be able to have a conversation in a whole different language, and I think that's kind of one of the reasons why we're trying to get it back on its feet, because it's just I don't know, it feels really nice to be able to just speak to people naturally in like in that kind of way. Yeah.
Yourself, Kinley, I mean, do you have lots of people outside of school that you manage to speak bits of Manx to?
Yeah, mainly my friends in Peel, because actually today I go to Matilda's house after school and we do a Dungeons and Dragons club and we speak a bit of Manx there as well.
Mary, Velulot Gilgrish the Air, do you speak Manx to your dad?
Used to reckon, like sometimes, but I usually speak to my sister as well, so I would ask her for a rubber sometimes when I'm drawing, or I can just speak to her in front of my parents or my grandparents without them really knowing what we're saying.
And is that one of the greatest attractions of Manx? And in that case, actually, would you prefer it if fewer people learn Manx and it was kept as your own secret language?
No, I'd prefer if loads of people speak Manx, but I think my parents really love it when they see me and my sister speaking Manx together because they know that this is working. Like, they can just tell that the Manx language is growing.
Marlene Masker MLC was representing the Department of Education, Sport and Culture and Culture Vannin. Talking to Marlene Masker, in this case deputising for the Minister and of Department of Education, and we're here at the launch of the Manx Language Strategy. Why is Culture Vannin, the Department of Education and others, why have they come together to make a strategy?
I think it's similar to the arts and cultural strategy, which is a joint strategy between Culture Vannin and Isle of Man Arts Council. You gain from the energy from that joined up thinking and the interrelationship across government and across our communities is it's spreading now, and I think that's really healthy. So this language strategy initiative has been growing and emerging over a period of time, and I think it has gained momentum and recognition and impetus because of that joint working. I should also say I'm here today deputising for the chair of Culture Vannin. Both he and the Minister weren't able to come and join us, but really wanted to be here. But I'm very proud to be here and launch this very important initiative. Yeah.
you don't speak much Manx. I mean, you obviously speak a little bit, but you're well known as a singer in the Manx language.
Yes, and in fact, when I think back, I remember Mona Douglas asking me to go and sing in Brittany, and I sometimes think if only I had gone then. But I was singing for a summer season with Man in Folk, and if I'd gone then, I think I would be probably an accomplished speaker, because she offered to teach me, and I had to balance it up, singing at the Beach Hotel and the Majestic, or do I go to Brittany? But unfortunately I didn't go. But it's amazing, the language, singing the language, it does have a certain energy, and there's something quite unique about it. And, others do it much better than me, but as you'll recognise, it does lend itself to music and vocalising. And that's obviously in the past, that's how tales and folklore has been passed down through poetry and the spoken word and the sung matters that we can iterate. And I'm very proud to be able to do that. And it's amazing how your brain just clicks in and you can remember a song or a poem, whereas Manx I find quite tricky.
Manx really was barely considered in when we were young. Generally speaking, most people who grew up in the 50s, 60s and probably 70s had very little access to the language. But there's been a fundamental shift since then, hasn't there?
Yes, and I think I shared with the children, I can remember when I was young, which is a long time ago, in the 50s, but my dad was from the north. He was one of 9 children, but at that time, the language really, it was almost looked down upon because of the influx of new residents, from all over the place. But the language, I think, was seen to be of the almost another class. And even the Isle of Man's history, I remember an orange history book, The History of the Isle of Man, and you'd open it up and it was the most unimaginative material that you could hope to have to engage with. But the resurgence, and as again I said, I can remember going to my best friend's house, the Cranes. They lived above the bank in Ramsey, and Charles Crane was one of the pioneers that helped save the language from extinction. And, of course, Constance Radcliffe taught at the grammar school, and she did all that research with her husband, Bill. And they saw, thank goodness, they saw the value of the language in terms of our culture and heritage and potential. And if they had not actually turned or steered people to turn a bit of a bend in the road there, we wouldn't be sitting here today on this amazing day where this language strategy has been launched.
Does Tynwald get this? I know Chris Thomas pushed particularly to get the Isle of Man to sign up to Part 3 of the European Treaty on Regional and Minority Languages. But do you think members of Tynwald really understand much about the language? Is it a concern or an interest of many, or is it just seen as one of those things that we kind of have to do, but not a great interest in it?
No, I'm actually heartened to say, I know Mr. President, Lawrence Skelly, June Watterson, Mr. Speaker, and now with the new intake, there is a real interest in the language and a drive to support it and engage. And Ruth Kegan-Gell came in and with yourself and Joe Collister and did just a lunchtime session explaining the merits and the richness and the advantages of being able to use the language just in kind of everyday conversation maybe, but particularly if we could start to use certain terms and phrases in Tynwald. That was so welcomed, especially by younger members of the Parliament and old, like myself and some of my colleagues. But I've witnessed it increasing and improving in the engagement and people getting more confident, because the more you use it, the better it gets. If you don't, you'll lose it. And so I'm really hopeful that this will become even more obvious to the listener. And the Bishop always says the blessing in Manx, he's very good at his languages. I think the Governor is also engaged with the language and really quite enthusiastic about learning the language with all his linguistic skills. So I think this, again, today is a red letter day for the language strategy. And I see this as just the beginning of the next phase. And to see so many of our young people here speaking so eloquently in both English and Manx and being confident and having that multifaceted approach. And again, their early years development, I think, has been enhanced by not just the language, but the Manx culture and music as well. Because, as I said, as we've discussed, music and the song and spoken word can add such an awful lot to the early cognitive development of a young person's mind and brain. So I think it's just the beginning.
Ruth Kegan-Gell is the Manx Language Officer for Culture Vannin. So what does she think?
Absolutely. We've been working hard together as a team in Jeeben to make this come together, and it's really exciting to have the launch of the strategy today, and it marks lots of exciting plans for the future.
And why do we need a strategy?
It's a really good thing to have a strategy where you look at other countries as well who have minority languages to make sure that we're all working together to avoid things like duplication, because you don't want, say, for example, 5 translations of the same book. So we all speak to each other and share what we're planning and share what we're hoping to achieve to make sure that we can work together for the language in the most efficient way possible. Because, of course, the language is, Manx is doing really well. There's an upsurge of interest in it, but we still have to pool our resources together to ensure that we're doing what we best can for the language, to move it forward.
Obviously, Jeeben is behind this, but how is it formed? What's it made up of?
Jeeben is a network of language organisations who work professionally for the language. So that means we've got different people, and those people aren't representing themselves as individuals, they're actually representing the organisations for which they work. So organisations include DESC, so different people who are working in the Department of Education, Sport and Culture, and we've got Culture Vannin, Munjavega, Manx National Heritage. I won't mention everybody because there's actually lots of different organisations, and of course we couldn't do this without the support of the third sector organisations as well. And there's so much happening in grassroots to support the language that what we do is very much drawn on expertise from people all through the Manx language community, the wider community. So why we need to work together, as I say, in a group is basically to make sure that we're doing things right and to bring through things forward. And if you look at different countries, they'll have these boards as well, sort of similar.
We've got the strategy. It's 5-year, possibly 10-year strategy. What are the 2 things that you would think are going to be the biggest successes that we could potentially achieve over the 10 years of the strategy?
So over the 10-year strategy, one of the biggest targets that Jeeben have as a collective is to grow the number of speakers to 5,000 by the year 2032. To do that, we have to have measurable targets that are achievable. They can't be woolly. They have to be measurable and achievable. And we've worked really hard as a team to try and make that happen. So we've looked and seen, have we got enough for the early years? Have we got enough for primary school age and secondary school age, and then adults, and people who've left school, gone through Manx medium education, and keeping those people engaged as young adults, right through to people starting to learn in later life as well. So it's making sure that there's something for everybody along the way, and that there's a real roadmap that you can take Manx on, and I think that's very, very important. It would be very difficult to pick out one of the aims that we've got because there's so many, and all of the different organisations have proffered and put in there different ones that they think they can achieve as organisations that are measurable. But if anybody would like to have a look, they can have a look at the strategy document, and you can go to Learn Manx website, which is www.learnmanx.com/Jeeben, Jeebin, and you can find the strategy document there and have a good peruse.
And actually, it's been sort of glossed over as we've been talking about the strategy at this launch, 5,000 Manx speakers by 2032. We've only got 2,223 according to the last census, which is a 25% increase on the census before that. So effectively, it is a very ambitious target. We're talking about doubling the number of Manx speakers, which is fantastic if we could achieve that.
Absolutely. And I think it is a common goal that was put forward for this, for 5,000 speakers by 2032. But I think if you don't aim big, then, I think it's a really good thing to aim and shoot for the stars, to use that slightly cheesy phrase. But, it is important to have ambitions and to show people we're serious about trying to achieve these things, and that increase in the last 10 years from the last census is fantastic. And actually it's worth celebrating that and saying, well, look, the trajectory is definitely upwards for Manx language speakers. And just that change in the last 10 years, in me looking around and seeing what's been happening, it's fantastic, the engagement and just how many people are seeing Manx as being very relevant and very worthy and something to get involved with. There's been a massive change even just in the last 10 years.
Rob Tier is the Manx Language Officer for the Department of Education, and Chrissy Callahan, the chair of GBAN, the organisation which pulled the strategy together. I asked Chrissy what's actually in the strategy.
I mean, the obvious one is that the aim to grow the language, to increase the number of speakers, that's a big ask. It's a big target to grow to 5,000 speakers by 2032. But actually, if you don't have aspirational targets, you're always going to aim for just good enough. So let's aim high. Let's, see what we can achieve over the next few years. And what the strategy aims to do is to break down actions in order to try and achieve that, working across different organisations. Munjavega starting at the very early years through the work of Podd and Cloy, through the work of the nurseries, so that we're engaging and involving parents. And I know that's a huge focus for Munjavega moving forward. How do we get parents involved in supporting their children in learning the language? Thinking about school, a huge focus is on how do we grow and develop teachers? Because actually, if you haven't got the teachers to grow and develop the language, how are you going to move that forward? So it's very much about encouraging teachers to want to teach through the language, helping them to upskill. And this is where Rob's expertise and his team come in, so that we have got more teachers who are able to help us grow that aspiration to increase the educational aspects of learning Manx. It then looks at resourcing across organisations. We've got M&H involved, and that's really important. Again, looking at our culture and heritage. And then it's thinking about that social use of Manx in the wider community. Manx isn't something you just do on a Tuesday night at the class you go to. Actually, how are we using Manx in our everyday lives? And certainly as someone, I've been back a while now, back home, but someone coming back to Manx and learning Manx, I try and use it when I'm out and about with those people I know are speaking it, just to practice it in my everyday life. Because I think the more we do that, the more we normalise the language and the more it becomes something that we all do naturally. So that's very much what the strategy focuses on, bringing all of those aspects together, which will hopefully then aim to meet that target of growing 5,000 speakers for 2032.
And Rob, I mean, you're the head of the Manx language team in the Department of Education, particularly in relation to the teaching Manx in the schools, Manx as a subject. How big an enterprise is that?
Well, I mean, I just know that we're very, very busy trying to produce resources and getting all the lessons and to because we teach over 2,000 pupils. So being able to do that is a big ask. But then we look at the fantastic work that M&H are doing, some of the good things up at Manx Radio, fantastic things at Culture Vannon, the Bunskull, of course, which is the hub of it all. And then all of the other groups around the island, the voluntary sector. So it's a huge joint effort, really. So it's very exciting, because I remember when it was when the government weren't interested, when the schools weren't interested, when I was at school. And so we've come a long way.
And it has moved substantially, hasn't it? I mean, when the revival, for want of a better word, started probably in the 60s and 70s, and then really took a big drive forward in the early 90s. There was very little support from government, but things have changed quite a lot now.
Yes, and I think signing up to Part 3 of the European Charter for Regional and Minority Languages has been huge in terms of the government's commitment to our language. So, in order to apply for that, we had to look at where Manx was being developed and used across the island in all aspects of government, in all aspects of education. So it was a big undertaking, but we were absolutely delighted when we were accepted, and we are now signed up to Part 3 of the Charter. So I think that reflects the commitment from the government to the language.
And what does Part 3, what does that mean? Because for most people, they won't even know what the Charter is. So and also, I suppose they'll be thinking, didn't the UK leave Europe, so what's that got to do with us? So could you tell us a bit more about it?
It's very much about protecting the languages, protecting regional and minority languages across Europe. So by signing up to that, you're acknowledging the importance of the language within your own community, but you're also then signing up to something that supports that development across the whole of Europe. So in a sense, it's making you think carefully about which aspects of the language that you are able to protect and develop, and to make sure that you're monitoring and ensuring that you grow that space. So in a sense, it breaks it down into different aspects of the language. Broadcasting, for example, which you work in, is one part of that. It looks at education as another part. It looks at legal as another part of that. We now know that we have a percentage of our laws which are translated into Manx each year, which is a wonderful thing to do. We now know when you're listening into Tynwald that we have quite a few members who will use Manx on the floor of Tynwald. So there are little things like that we need to preserve, but we also need to develop. And what Part 3 does is makes you think as a government, as an island, about how you're doing that, how you're going about it.
And we have a treaty that government has signed up to. What we don't have is any protection for the language in terms of any legislation. So, for example, the Discrimination Act protects all kinds of different minority interests and groups. But actually, if you're a Manx speaker, you don't really have too many rights at the moment.
No, that's true, and neither do our place names, and it is a bit of a worry because nobody else is going to look after our language for us. We have to. So it would be nice to see a bit of protection. I just think, when we're looking about the future, we have to think back about the hard work and the sacrifices of the people who had no support. We must never lose sight of that, because we're in a good position now, but it rests, like the bedrock of that work was done very much by people. I'm thinking like Leslie Quirk and Freddie Cowell and Johnny Crellin. And we mustn't forget them. And we've got a great platform now to really move on.
Of course, probably the most tragic thing that there is about the Manx language is that interview, I think, that Doug Farragher did with the BBC. Doug Farragher, who had spent his whole life compiling a dictionary, which is fundamental for the whole future. And of course, and Doug was effectively saying, I wasted me time. He'd produced the dictionary, I think it was in 1979, and then 1984 or 5, I think he was saying it's not worked. It's a waste of time and it's going nowhere. And yet now, people. I think for people who don't speak Manx, they think, well, I never hear it, I never see it. But if you hang around with me for a day, you'll find wherever I go in the island, there are speakers. And they all want to use it, and it's phenomenal. And it just wasn't the case 30 years ago. Absolutely. And Chrissy, you're a learner. You also give guidance to the Bunscoil Gilgach, and obviously you've got this role as chair of the of Jeeban. So you're quite an active player in all this.
I hope so, and I think for me, certainly in terms of supporting both Bunscoil Gilgach, it's about looking at good quality teaching and learning outcomes, and that transcends really any language. Learning in a language is learning in a language, and we know that the outcomes for bilingual speakers and the cognitive benefits are huge for youngsters who learn a language. What's been amazing, I mean, walking in here today into QE2 was I ended up having a multilingual conversation with a group of young people who were learning Manx with mine stood here, with Rob here. They were then, one youngster spoke in French about the cup of tea we were having, and then she said, and I said, oh, in French, do you understand? You speak a bit of French? And she said, well, actually, I speak a little bit of Italian too. And I went, oh, I learned, that's my language. I can speak much more fluently. And she then said, well, I learn it through Manx with Meinster Rogers. So, language is huge. And once you start learning one language, it leads to another. So I just think that the benefits to any youngster and any adult learning a language is immense. And I'm certainly loving going back and learning Manx again. And, Rob will challenge me in terms of me emailing and I'm having to respond in Manx. Jonathan House will do the same and from Arbury. And then I have my buddy who is Jonathan, who I speak Manx to. So, there's a lot out there if you want to learn Manx. And I just love the whole challenge for me, again, learning properly another language.
And in terms of the cognitive benefits of being bilingual, it all sounds terribly academic textbook, doesn't it? But the reality of it is, first of all, people who are bilingual at an early age tend to be very good at learning and picking up other languages. The thing that perhaps surprises many people is that they're also better at English because they have more access to more ideas and therefore are able to do more with their English. But one of the great thing was that seminar that the department allowed us into with the British Irish Council, where they were talking about things like conflict resolution and being able to understand two sides of an argument, things like this. It's big stuff, isn't it?
It is big stuff, and we were lucky enough, as part of organising that webinar for the British Irish Council with the Welsh Government, and we were lucky enough to have Professor Antonella Sirachi, who is part of the University of Edinburgh, who gave a wonderful keynote on the benefits of bilingualism. And what she was talking about is exactly what you were saying, that there are so many more benefits than just being a good linguist and being able to access other languages. Actually, we know from so much of the research that the benefits of bilingualism will impact generic outcomes for young people in terms of their achievement and attainment later on in life. So, it is immense in terms of what you can get from learning another language. And that's why, why not make that Manx? It's our language. We should be preserving and developing that, within schools. And the outcomes for young people learning Manx are very good. So, that's proof in the pudding, really.
So, final comment then, putting you both on the spot. 5,000 Manx speakers by 2032. Is it going to happen?
If you'd have said to me there'd be 2,000 speakers 30 years ago, I wouldn't have believed it. So you never know.
And I think, for me, I would like to see it happen. It's an aspirational target. I think the joined up working is the way to achieve that. So I think by having a strategy, by moving together rather than working separately, we're more likely to be able to achieve that.
Yeah, well, it kind of, having Manx on the island kind of differentiates us from the rest of the UK and reviving the whole culture of the island, basically.
Kinley.
Yeah, Manx is part of our identity, and I think if we forget that, then that's a big chunk of our culture gone.
Gil Kaboo!
Is the strategy on the right track, or is Manx a thing of the past, best left to history? Please get in touch with Phil Gorn at manxradio.com and let me know your thoughts and views. And don't forget, the podcast is available from Manx Radio's website. But for now, I'm Phil Gorn. Goro Mayo son Geisha Grum. Thanks for listening.